new, perfect. The flow state is a new field in psychology that people are looking into, the scientists are looking into, and I do believe that it'll be very helpful for you all in not only your work lives, but also your personal lives. For whatever goals that you're wanting to achieve, you can utilize and practice these principles that I'm going to teach today. I think it can increase the quality of anyone's life here. So before we get into that, I want to ask, is anyone here a fan of Marvel movies? And if so, drop your favorite Marvel superhero in the chat. My personal favorite's Iron Man. I think him and I have a lot of similarities. He's witty, I'm witty. He's a billionaire. I will be a billionaire someday. But when we think about superheroes, a lot of times we think of their superpowers, right? Well, what if I told you that you also have the propensity to harness your own superpower? And most of you are probably thinking, all right, like he means this figuratively. Or you could be thinking, hey, this is true for other people like famous businessmen like Elon Musk, or famous athletes like Usain Bolt, or very, very prominent scientists like people like Albert Einstein. But I do mean this literally. There's almost a supernatural state that is available to you, one that the majority of high achievers and peak performers use to achieve what we call impossible. There's a state that allows you to be placed right smack in the middle of what you're creating simultaneously as you're perceiving it. If you've ever seen Inception, you may understand this concept a bit. There's a state that you can use to practice the art of time bending, where you're intentionally separating subjective time from clock time. Anyone who's ever spent the entire day with friends and felt the hours pass like minutes knows what this is. You can strategically use this state to manipulate this effect in your favor. Introducing the flow state. It's the optimal state of consciousness, or a peak performance state. It's also known as being in the zone or runner's high. The symptoms of the state are dilation of time. So you'll feel time slowing down or speeding up. You'll feel moments of rapt attention, total absorption. So fully in the moment, almost like you're blacking out, right? A sense of control, almost like a supernatural sense of control, where you feel like you are manipulating outcomes that you don't normally, or you're not normally able to do. A merging of actions and awareness, right? The perception and creativity at the same time. The disappearance of self, especially the inner critic, that little voice inside your head that's like, sure about that? That goes away. Benefits of the flow state. And we'll talk about why these are what they are, but up to 500% increase in motivation and productivity. Sabina, if you're on this call, imagine instead of optimizing 2 ad accounts a day, you're optimizing 10 in this state. Learning curves cut in half. They say learning a new language takes about 3 months to 2 years to be fully fluent in. Imagine cutting that in half to a month and a half to even less. Content team, this one's for you. Creativity and innovation increases up to 400% plus. Memory increases 200%. Before we'll get into why this is the case, I want to give you guys a brief history of flow science. So rewind back to mid-1800s, Charles Darwin released his theory of evolution, specifically through natural selection, right? The strong survive. Well, that caused a big spark in the scientific community, especially the psychology community. People started looking at this concept under a microscope, and entered Friedrich Nietzsche. He was a philosopher of existentialism, and some say nihilism, but he was the first high-performance philosopher. And pretty much he looked into what Darwin said about evolution, and he took it one step further. He said, okay, well, if the body evolves, then maybe the mind evolves. And if the mind evolves, does consciousness evolve? And he pretty much developed a concept, a state that people can enter. And he nicknamed this the highest state humans can achieve. He called it Rausch, which is German for intoxication or ecstasy. And he said it was the highest state that any humans can achieve. We fast forward a bit to the early 1900s, people started associating the state as a religious or mystical experience because people in religious communities reported feeling this immense state of euphoria and oneness and focus with God, with their communities when they were worshiping. Then we fast forward a bit more to Abraham Maslow. You guys may have heard of him, but he's a humanistic psychologist. And he began studying people who seemed to be at their best. So he studied Albert Einstein, he studied Eleanor Roosevelt, and found that these people were harnessing and experiencing this state to achieve what he called self-actualization, which is the highest state that a human can achieve when they're fully aligned with their goals, they're fully acting them out, they're in alignment with their passion and purpose. The kicker of all of this was that everyone he studied who was in this state were not actually religious, they were all atheists. So he made the connection that, okay, this state isn't just for people who are religious, who have a relationship with God, it's for everyone. That's great. So he called this state peak experiences. Now we have, and this guy's name is hard to pronounce, but Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I know it sounds like I'm butchering the name, but that's actually correct. He was a positive psychologist, and he pretty much expanded upon what Abraham Maslow was looking into. And he began traveling the world, interviewing as many people as possible who claimed to be experiencing this state: Buddhists, Hindus, bikers, you name it. And all the reports had one common factor, that people described this feeling of ideas and actions flowing effortlessly into and out of each other. And so we call this state flow, obviously. It's a phenomenological description of what the state makes us feel like, very flowy. Another way you can look at this state is it's the third iteration of attention. So, when something catches your eye, you notice something, you simply place your attention on it. Maybe it's an idea. Then you begin to study and fixate on it. It takes more and more time of your attention. You begin to prolong your focus. That's focus. And then third iteration is flow. This is when you embody or even become or have the feeling of becoming what you're focusing on. People who most commonly report being in the flow state are adrenaline junkies. Michael Jordan, if you're on this call, you might understand. Surfers, speakers, I'm sure Eddie's felt this, and monks. But pretty much any highly specialized individuals who are typically passionate about what they do. So what is this feeling? What are the changes happening in the brain that actually cause us to feel this oneness, this embodiment of becoming what we're focusing on? Well, there's a couple things going on in the brain. We'll talk neuroanatomical first. A lot of people think that the 10% myth about the brain, that we only use 10% of our brains at one time, and that a lot of people think when I discuss peak performance states and the flow state, that okay, like we must be using more of our brain, right? But it's actually the exact opposite. We're using less of our brain. Specifically, the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that's associated with higher order cognitive abilities. It maps your sense of self. So yourself as an entity separated from your surroundings, and your sense of time, how you actually calculate time and perceive time. This all gets shut down. And that's why you get these feelings of oneness with everything around you. It's like the veil is lifted between you and your surroundings, and that time seems to flow by. Like if you're ever writing a paper, right? You're focusing on what you have to write. You kind of lock in, and then you look at the clock. It's been like 3 hours, but it feels like 5 minutes to you. Same feeling. Your right brain, which is associated with lateral thinking, linking disparate or seemingly unrelated ideas, is activated highly. In other words, your creativity is jacked up. And your neocortex, which is associated with pattern recognition, is also jacked up to the highest levels. Your mind already does this to an extent, but it's just 5 to 10x in the flow state. So brain imaging technology has since progressed since Maslow and Mihaly, last 20 years especially. This image maps an overlay of parts of the brain that are associated with the specific experiences for someone on psychedelics versus someone in the flow state. I know when I say psychedelics, some people think like Black Sabbath or like the Beatles or anything trippy, right? But it's actually being heavily looked into right now in the scientific community, specifically in psychology. But we're actually able to conduct fMRIs and brain scans on people in these specific states. You can see in this image that flow is the red outline and psychedelic experience is the white outline. So people in the flow state have this huge increase in a feeling of peacefulness, love, and unity. There's no visuals, nothing like that. It's increased to some extent, nothing crazy. Spiritual experience for sure. Out of body, not as much, but imagination, insight, fluid and connective thinking are all increased almost as much as when you were actually taking a substance like a psychedelic. So incredible. Neurochemical changes. So neurochemicals, neurotransmitters, These are responsible for carrying messages across synapses between neurons. They're messengers that aid in what you are feeling and how you're perceiving the world around you. For example, motivation. Some of us are familiar with the feelings of these specific neurotransmitters. For example, when you're running and you get that runner's high, those are endorphins, very euphoric type of feeling. When you're laughing, you get that sense of joy, well-being. That is serotonin being released. Acts of intimacy, so kissing, hugging, cuddling, other stuff. Oxytocin, so it's a social bonding hormone. Paired with dopamine, which is a reward response, so it gives you that feeling of pleasure, and then serotonin, that joy and well-being. All those are released during acts of intimacy. However, in the flow state, you get all of them, all in large quantities. Dopamine, serotonin, endorphins. Norepinephrine is a neurotransmitter associated with making you feel on high alert. It gets released when you're in like a fight or flight response, for example. So very high alert, but also these feel good pleasure chemicals. Anandamide is associated with linking disparate ideas as well, kind of connectivity throughout the brain, creativity, and then oxytocin, that social bonding neurotransmitter. So all of those are released during the brain. So why is that? Why are all these feel good chemicals? Why is our brain tagging this event as super meaningful to us? What is this telling us? It's pretty much saying this is super important for evolution, for our personal evolution, but also evolution as a species. In short, learning works like this. New information is introduced. Neurochemicals are released during the acquisition of that new information. And the more neurochemicals that are released, the more the mind transfers this information from short-term holding to long-term storage. It's literally like a giant neon sign saying, this is important, save for later. This is essentially what your brain is doing. We can begin to aim this state and this flooding of reward chemicals to things that better serve us. In other words, we can force self-evolution quicker through the flow state. So it's important to note that the flow state is not binary. It's not you're in flow or you're not in flow. It's peak state, right? So you can't always be in it. It's not an everyday state. Your body's expending a lot of energy, a lot of these precious neurochemicals, and so you cannot actually be in the state forever. But it's important to know that it occurs in 4 different stages. We're going to map this out so we can all understand what that looks like. So on the front end, when you're about to enter flow, the first state you have to go through is what we call the struggle phase. The struggle phase is the front end. Beta brain waves are released in the brain. And these occur during an intense waking state, similar to when you're taking an exam or doing something very challenging. Cortisol and noradrenaline or norepinephrine are released as well. This is the same types of neurotransmitters that are released during a fight or flight response when you feel threatened. Lots of focus and attention. In other words, you should feel very uncomfortable. This should be a struggle for you. You should actually have to consciously be commanding your attention on whatever you're wanting to focus on. And so this is like when you're sitting down, you have to focus on a project and you know it's important. You have to write a paper, but you can feel your mind drifting here and there and you start daydreaming. You want to pick up the phone, call your friend, you want to zone out. You have to actually consciously fight this. This should feel uncomfortable. And so the goal here is to figure out how to struggle gracefully, because this is a part of the process. This is completely normal. And I think a lot of us enter this phase and actually find ways to distract ourselves. So we actually never get to partake in the benefits of what's coming next, which we'll talk about. But it's important to know how can we struggle gracefully. Number 1, gratitude practices. All right, like, hey, I have to perform this task or write this paper, but I'm super glad I get this opportunity because it's growing me as a person, for example. Or you can try cognitive reframing. William James is a famous psychologist in the early 1900s. He pretty much said most unhappiness is caused by people listening to themselves instead of talking to themselves. If you really think about it, you really look into the specific neurotransmitters that are released when you are afraid or nervous or anxious versus when you're excited, they release the same exact neurochemicals, but it's your perception of the situation that actually changes how you're able to struggle gracefully. So the goal on the front end here is to push the struggle to a precipice, the point of frustration where you're wanting to throw all your papers off the desk, you want to slam your laptop, you want to just get up, and then you back off. Literally take your mind off the problem. Once you do that, we'll talk about how you can do that. You're releasing alpha brainwaves, which is a much calmer state. It's not calm enough for you to go to sleep or anything like that, but it is a lot calmer of a state. Your body releases nitric oxide, which causes blood vessels to widen, increases more blood flow. It's literally a release of tension. And then you enter this state, this phase, by doing any type of deep embodiment activity. Not to the point of exhaustion, but just enough to quiet the mind. Walks are great. Albert Einstein used to sail his boat to the middle of Lake Geneva in Switzerland. Funny story, he actually didn't know how to sail, so he would sail in the middle and have to get rescued multiple times, but he knew the importance of this state. If you guys have ever been at work all day and you've been busy, you've been struggling in the struggle phase, you've been anxious, and then you go home, you take a shower, and then like, boom, all these ideas start flooding. And you remember what you should have said to the client when you were arguing with them? That is this state. So that's the same concept here. So showers are great for this activity. I go on drives, but again, nothing too engaging like TV. You want to take yourself to the actual cusp of frustration, then back off. One thing to note before we go to the next phase is your body and your brain has a specific pattern recognition system that we talked about, right? Flow maximizes this process, of course, but if you're facing an issue, or maybe you just have a goal that you're wanting to achieve, but you have no clue how it's going to work out, it's always important to get intentional and get specific and write down the specific areas where you're wanting to grow, right? Or the specific characteristics of the goal. Point A to point B, here are my intentions. You fix on it for a bit, then you go do a release activity, and then watch how quickly your mind connects the dots. If you guys have ever lost something like your keys or your wallet, and you're freaking out, and you're walking around the house, you have no idea where you put it, you're super stressed, and then you like finally accept it, and then you're saying, okay, like I'll have to cancel all my cards and do this, and then all of a sudden you just see it. It's like right in front of you the whole time. That's your brain pretty much incubating the situation and then coming up with a solution. Same concept. So this is a telltale sign that you're about to drop into the flow state with all its benefits, all of its amazing qualities. When you're in the flow state, your gamma brainwaves are released as well, but they're also released with theta brainwaves. And gamma brainwaves are the fastest waves your body produces. They're associated with higher consciousness and awareness. Theta brainwaves are actually uncommon in waking states for adults, but they're common in children. And they're common for adults right before you're about to fall asleep, when you're in REM sleep, when you're meditating. So this feeling of like absolute creativity, profound ideas, these are all the neurochemicals that we're talking about as well. That's the flow state. You feel like that immense creativity, fully locked in, you almost black out in some sense, time disappears. We talked about what's happening on the neuroanatomical level, but also neurochemical level. And you'll know you're in the flow state by these 4 qualities. Number 1, you'll feel selfless. Talk about the prefrontal cortex shutting down. Timeless as well. Both of those faculties are completely shut down, so you're not experiencing them at all. It should feel effortless. Whatever you're doing, it should feel like it's coming from some external source or from within you, deep down. You're full of inspiration. It's like, you're not even thinking. You're not even consciously thinking about what you're writing down or what you're performing or what you're saying. It's coming out of you, right? Richness. So picture if you're like editing a picture on the in like Lightroom or something, any type of photo editing software, where if you increase the saturation all the way up on a picture, your perceptual experience should be jacked up to a high level because all these neurochemicals are being released. You're in somewhat of a high, right? So those are the key characteristics of the flow state, but you should know you're in the flow state by those 4 signs. What goes up must come down. So there is a recovery phase. These are when delta brainwaves are released. This is your lowest frequency of brainwaves that your brain produces. These are associated with deep sleep and almost a feeling of drowsiness. You still have the social bonding chemical and the serotonin chemical, so joy and well-being. So you're kind of just sitting back like, that was awesome. You can review your work and see how much you did and how high quality it was. This one can be tough because a lot of peak performers, A players, a lot of people on this call don't like to actually recover because maybe you feel guilty or you're always wanted to stay active. I understand, I'm the same way, but it takes a lot of self-control. Best way to recover is what we call active recovery. It's not fully laying back on, sitting back watching TV or anything like that. You always want to do something like take sauna, massages, meditation, walking, something similar to what you did in the release phase. And it's important to know that there are flow blockers that can prevent you from entering the state. For example, fixed mindsets, negative thinking. If you are in the struggle phase and you have a very fixed mindset and you say, hey, this is not good for me, I need to get out of the state, like I'm gonna distract myself, obviously you're not going to enter it. Interruptions and distractions, people calling you on the phone, notifications going off. It's important to block yourself from those so that you're not blocked from flow. Overtraining, burnout, and exhaustion. Again, that's a huge one, and I want to double down on that actually. Recovery is super important. It's so under acknowledged, especially in the entrepreneurial niche. Want to make sure we focus on that also, because remember, your brain is expending all this energy, all these precious chemicals, and if you're not properly recovering, you're not going to be able to reproduce them and then enter the state more frequently. Here are a couple ways you can do that. Sleep hygiene is always great. If you are curious about that, I have a lot of learning materials on sleep hygiene. Active recovery, like we talked about. Yoga and stretching is a great one to release tension before the state. But essentially, this is the main premise around what the flow state is. Does that all make sense? Put a 1 in the chat if this makes sense. Cool. Perfect. Okay, moving forward.
Christian, before you go, can you go over the highest frequency of your brain to the lowest frequency and like kind of map it out from top to bottom, like waves wise?
Yes. So in terms of the flow, for the flow state, beta brainwaves are what you start with. Beta brainwaves aren't the lowest state you can be in. They're actually pretty high because you're struggling and you should feel tense. It's fight or flight. So those are going to make you a little bit. It's a sympathetic nervous system. So your heartbeats increasing. Pupils are dilating, for example. Blood is increasing, flowing. And when on the release phase, you'll have alpha brainwaves. And so alpha is obviously not anything too crazy. It's a calmer state. It's not the calmest state you can be in, but it's not stressed either. It's kind of like that. If you're out for a walk and you're hiking, for example, or you're in the shower, same type of feeling. Flow state is an oscillation between the highest brainwave state, so gamma, and then also the actual one of the lowest, the second to lowest theta brainwaves. That's where like you're right before you're about to fall asleep, and then the lowest is alpha brainwaves, so very calm. This is like when you're like passing out, you're sleeping, but not in REM sleep. So
cool. Thanks.
You got it. Makes sense. Great. So how to enter the flow state. 2 things we need to cover before we figure out how to enter the flow state is, number 1, flow is ubiquitous, meaning it's available to everyone. It's not something that's only available to athletes or scientists or famous businessmen. You can actually enter it very easily. It's pretty simple to do so, actually, because flow has triggers, specific triggers. These triggers are being aligned with your passion purpose, having clear goals to follow, immediate feedback for how you're achieving these goals, some sense of autonomy. We'll talk about a specific time allocation for autonomy, some type of novelty. It shouldn't be something you're too familiar with. And with novelty comes risk. It can't be too simple. We talked about that. Complexity, and then challenge skills ratio, which we'll talk about here later. The goal is to structure your media environment to be a catalyst for inducing the flow state. In other words, you want to structure your life around these triggers that we talked about. And before we talk about them in more detail, we also want to take into account the Pygmalion effect. And the central premise is your beliefs shape your expectations, which influence your behavior, which influence your results, and then further your beliefs. And it's a self-perpetuating cycle. If a guy goes up to a girl and asks her out, if he doesn't think there's at least a chance for her to say yes and actually give him her number, then he's not going to do it, right? So you need to have that central belief and that expectation that this can happen for you, and it's possible for you to actually take action and engage in the behavior that you're needing. So let's note that. So first step to structuring more flow into your life is considering the 6 intrinsic drivers with the goal of defining your purpose. Now, we talked about the flow triggers, autonomy, passion, and purpose. Those are what we call the flow triad. You need those 3 intrinsic drivers in order to trigger the flow the most effectively. Difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic is, you can ask yourself, what do you enjoy? What could you enjoy doing even if you weren't getting paid, right? Something that really that is you're curious about, something that you could be doing all day. And extrinsic motivation is like, hey, if you sweep my floor, I'll pay you $10. It's like, okay, like some type of external reward. It's not necessarily aligned with your passion, your purpose, or your curiosity. So it's not as strong of a motivator. It is still a motivator, but not the strongest. So you will be more intrinsically motivated if you have your passion and purpose in your immediate environment to some degree, right? And so you can pretty much define your passion as the intersection of multiple curiosities. So you have to be curious about it in some sense. You have to be interested in it for you to actually engage in a activity or a vocation or a job for a prolonged period of time. And then we move that one step further to purpose, which is your passion plus a cause bigger than yourself, something outside of yourself, kind of removes the ego from the situation. And these can all be tied back into your biology again. They're all associated with specific neurochemicals, all reward responses. You can see the different makeups here on the side. And so when you actually align your life with all these intrinsic drivers or your vocation or whatever action you're performing, that's when you start seeing that kid the night before Christmas effect, where you're like super excited to wake up the next day and do what you have to do in life, right? And that's the goal at the end of the day. One thing I want to note too on the subject of finding your passion and purpose is your personality trait, personality profile. This is one of the most popular scales. It's called the Big Five personality scale. Each of us have a unique personality profile. And obviously there's a balance between nature versus nurture. You know, we're born with a specific makeup and a specific profile, but your experiences and as you grow older, what you are exposed to can shape your personality to some extent. But if you take this, this will show you what your priorities should be, where to focus your energy, why you value what you do, and where those misalignments of those values are. For example, one of the traits on here, agreeableness. This describes a person's ability to put others' needs before their own. They make great friends, but they also have the propensity to being stepped on. I know some of us in the call may resonate with that. This might show you that, okay, well, I know even though it makes me uncomfortable, I may need to start focusing on being more bold and saying no more often, right? And this is scary to me. This will cause me to enter that struggle phase, but it identifies an area of improvement that I should be focusing my attention on. And then once I actually achieve a more aligned structure of my life with this specific character trait, now you're living life on a whole new level that you're a lot more happy in. You're functioning at a higher level. You feel that higher alignment, right? Extroversion, for example. How energetic and outgoing are you? Maybe you've been isolating yourself. Maybe you work remote, and maybe you shouldn't be because you're high in extroversion, right? Neuroticism, propensity for being anxious. Maybe you require more security to help you sleep at night, and maybe that's in a financial sense. So you realize, okay, I need to be making more. I need to earn more. I need to stop being as lazy and go out and make more money. Whatever it is, this will show you what you need to focus on. Knowing your profile will give you a better idea of what you should direct your flow on, for example. The next flow trigger is autonomy. Autonomy is simply the right or condition of self-government. This is one of the fundamental driving forces of human happiness and satisfaction. It's to be able to do what you want when you want to do it. Obviously, this occurs on somewhat of a continuum, but this is a flow trigger because you need to feel the freedom to be pursuing what you're passionate in. Scientists say that if you have pure autonomy of at least 20% of your time a week, let's say, time to go to the gym and rest when you need to, and then actually pursue and work on whatever you want to work on personally, that is sufficient enough to be entering the flow state as frequently as possible. There's actually two paths to autonomy. And again, like I said, this is on a continuum. All of us are subject to some form of government, whether it be your parents, boss, government, God. There are caveats, obviously, but we crave free will. Why do you think it annoys you so much when someone tells you to do something that you are already going to do? You're like, all right, well, now I don't want to do it because you told me. That's the concept there. But doing the things that you want to do, great. Some of us have that to some extent or the other. But more commonly, it's the second option, wanting to do the things that you have to do. And this takes a bit of cognitive reframing to some extent. If you've defined your purpose and you're able to make the connection between what you're currently doing, that the specific action you're taking right now, and what your long-term purpose and goal and vision is for your life, that's how you can begin wanting to do what you want to do. For example, when I was in college, I wanted to teach psychology lectures, similar to what I'm doing right now. And I also wanted to earn extra credit. So I joined the peer education program in the psych department to guest teach mental health awareness to different classes on campus. It wasn't exactly what my purpose was, and I was doing it all for free, but I was in the environment I wanted to be in, and I was okay with pushing the broom, so to speak, to get my foot in the door and kind of practice skills I needed. And I was able to connect it back, tie it back to my purpose, which is what allowed me to want to do it, right? If that gap is too wide, for example, if you're wanting to be president or something and you're working on a crab boat, it's like probably not the most aligned place to be in, right? So it's important to know that if the gap is too wide, you will experience what's called cognitive dissonance, which can be defined as the mental gap between two contradiction, or the gap between two contradictory ideas, right? So like, hey, I want to be this, but I'm here. It's like way too separated. Obviously, you can make the connection, but if it's too wide, it's very tough to, and that's a very stressful, depressive state to live in. That will certainly block your flow. This is kind of where the serenity prayer comes in, where you ask, Lord, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. The more defined you are on your purpose and your goals, the easier it will be to tell the difference here. Which leads us to next flow trigger, clear goals and KPIs. This is super fitting to where we're at as a company. If you've talked to Eric, Fredo, or I recently, we are pushing out heavily KPIs for each specific department. And the goal is to set these high level KPIs so that we can reverse engineer, so that we know how quickly and how well we're progressing towards a specific outcome, right? So key is reverse engineering. If I want to make 6 figures a year, that comes to $8,333 a month, $1,923 per week, and $273.97 a day, right? So now I know, like, okay, if I have my own e-commerce business, I sell a $30 product 10 times a day, okay, like I'm on my way, right? You get that immediate feedback, which is a flow trigger within itself. So the key here is goal stacking. You want to start with your what we call massively transformative purpose. Like, what is my long-term goal? Why am I here? What am I here to do, right? And this is something that you don't actually want to be able to achieve. So whatever you have down, go ahead and 10x, 100x it, because you should never actually achieve this. It should be always something that you're aiming towards. They should always be becoming and not have become it, right? Once you've defined that, then you can start reverse engineering, break it down to your high hard goals. I know I have 1 to 10 years here. Better number is 3 to 5. It starts getting a little hazy when you're looking out a little bit too far. Obviously, you'll acquire new information, new skills on your way, but 3 to 5 years is more of a sweet spot. Then you can break those down to operationally chunked goals, which are weeks and months, and then break them down to the daily 5s that we do here, right? And that's the goal. And you cannot accurately reverse engineer if you don't have that long-term goal set up first. One thing to note is the checklist effect. So if anyone here has actually created checklists, and once you actually complete something on the checklist, you get that little hit of dopamine, and you're like, hell yeah, I did it, right? Stacking little wins like that is a formula for neuroplasticity. Best way to describe neuroplasticity is picture yourself on a dirt road, you're walking on it, and the more you're walking on it, the more developed it gets, and the more the quicker you can walk back and forth, and you keep doing this, you keep doing this, you keep doing this, and then all of a sudden it's a full-blown highway where you can traverse back and forth as quickly as you want. That's pretty much how new neural networks are formed in the brain, but it takes that repetitiveness, that struggle in the beginning. That's how addictions are formed. That's also how beneficial habits are formed. So it follows neuroplasticity follows dopamine. So when you're getting those little hits, it'll compound. A little better view here of how you want to reverse engineer your goals. Feedback becomes exponentially more useful to you when you've actually set these up. It's self-evident feedback too. It's like, okay, if I've broken it all the way down from my MTP to my hard goals to my annual, quarterly, monthly, weekly, daily 5s, then I know if I didn't get these 5 tasks done today, like I didn't make progress. It's that very quick self-evident feedback. This is super important. Last flow trigger I want to talk about is the challenge skills sweet spot. So when you're actually picking a task and an action that you want to take, where you really want to enter the flow state, you want to actually use the benefits and use this higher state of consciousness in, you want to pick something that you're not overqualified for, first of all. It can't be too simple. We talked about having novelty, having some degree of risk. It needs to be somewhat challenging to you. If it's too easy for you, you're going to get bored, and you will not be able to prolong the action thereof. And if it's too challenging for you, the opposite end of the spectrum, you have the propensity for feeling anxious, and then maybe feeling somewhat of a crushing feeling, and you won't be able to do that for long either. or you'll burn out, right? So somewhere right in the middle, they say arbitrarily 4% outside of this sweet spot is the ideal spot to be in for achieving the flow state. They call it the flow channel, right? So picking tasks that are 4% outside of your skill level. In other words, get uncomfortable. Best way to enter flow right there. Does that all make sense? Can I get a 1 in the chat if this makes sense? Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, perfect. So moving into summary and application. So obviously flow is a 4-stage process. Your brain is tagging these events as important. You are operating at a much higher level, but it takes getting through the struggle phase, backing off, and then pushing forward again, and then you're in it, and then you got to make sure you're recovering. And the goal is to structure your immediate environment around these flow triggers to help be a catalyst for entering the flow state. And so the goal is to lubricate towards your goals, create friction against your distractions. Here's how you actually can relate this back to your everyday lives. Increasing the barrier between you and what is distracting you, for example. Let's say you don't want to be on your phone as much anymore, right? And you found that it's very, very detrimental to your learning and your attention and your focus. Start charging your phone on the other side of the room, right? Now, when you want to use it before bed, you got to get out of bed, you got to walk across the floor, you got to pick up the phone, and you got to go back and get situated again. It's like, okay, there's a lot of steps there. I'm probably just going to stay in bed, right? For me, I found a protein shake that I actually think tastes good, that has caused me to be way more consistent. Hopefully you can tell, I don't know, but if not, I gotta keep going there. Take the Big 5 personality test. We talked about how important this is for understanding what you are passionate about and what you need to focus on and what your priorities should be. Figure out what fuels you, right? Most of us have like a little idea of what this could be, but this will allow you to define it to a very granular level, and you'll develop laser-like focus. I can give you a link, let me know. The only thing here is you want to make sure you're answering truthfully and not ideally. Not what you should be like or how you feel like you should be acting, but how do you actually act, right? It's the best way to get the most accurate results here. Talked about the goal stacking and reverse engineering them. The alchemy of passion purpose starts by defining your massively transformative purpose and then working backwards, right? You can't get anywhere without defining that high level goal first and then working backwards. Simplify. This is my desktop right now, guys. Look how nice that is. Like this cures my OCD when I look at it. You can reduce cognitive load, which is a concept of your brain only has a finite amount of energy per day to expend. And when you actually have a bunch of icons on here, you have notifications going off and everything's all messy, that does take some energy from your brain, energy you need to make decisions later on. Remember, all those precious neurochemicals that are being released, you want to save those as much as possible for when you're actually in the state and you're focused on one thing only. Simplify more. Decision fatigue, the tangible phenomenon where the quality of your decisions goes way down when you have to make too many decisions in any given day. So you can start automating decisions in your life. For example, only buying one color of the same type of shirt. Now you don't have to choose an outfit in the morning every day. Both Eddie and Mark Zuckerberg do this, so it must work. Following heuristics. Amazon uses this decision-making heuristic called the speed reversibility matrix. And the central premise is the reversibility versus the impact a specific decision will make should dictate how much time and effort it should take for you to decide. For example, if we're wanting to change a specific SOP in the company, right? Well, we need to think, okay, how reversible is this? Can I make this change and then like quickly go back if not, if it doesn't work out? And then how impactful is this going to like affect everyone in the company? If not either of those, okay, we'll just use experience and we'll decide very quickly, right? But if it's like, all right, this is going to affect everyone in the company and it's not reversible, this is a one-way door, it's not a two-way door, we better do a lot of research, we better consult with gurus and consultants and coaches before we actually make this decision and roll it out. So think of one-way doors and two-way doors. This can help save you time from actually having to structure all this in your brain and use your imaginative faculties. All right, F11. Pay attention to your keyboard, guys. We all have this key. F11 will put you in full screen mode. If anyone has ever been on a call with me and I've shared my screen, you'll see that I have an incredible amount of tabs on top. Like you can't even see the favicon. There's so many. That's very hard to work with because your focus is being drawn in so many different or your attention is being drawn in so many different ways, right? Different areas. It's important to practice full screen mode, fully zoning in. Whenever I actually am working on an account, I need to zone in. I need to actually look at the numbers. I'm in full screen mode because this eliminates a lot of distractions, eliminates like any buzzers going off, anything blinking. Like I think some tabs blink when there's notifications going off, for example. All those can block you from entering the flow state. I know some of us work with multiple different monitors, so that's something different. But this helps me a lot. Dopamine detoxing. Again, we talked about neuroplasticity and how that is driven by dopamine, or by neuroplasticity is driven by dopamine, right? So anytime we can save as much dopamine as possible, it puts yourself in a position to create habits quicker, break addictions quicker, learn a lot faster, retain information a lot more. So anything having to do with flow, you want to start saving your dopamine as much as possible. Every time you see these colors on a notification, like, any of these apps colors or notifications going off, you get little hits of dopamine that are literally rewarding you for doing nothing. This is my phone right now. Check this out. Completely black and white. Super nice. And when you actually do this, it's like you look at your phone and you're like it's almost like a feeling of disgust. It's like, I don't even want to look at this. I'll throw this over here. So I'm on a 3-month detox right now. No alcohol, phone's in black and white, cut down significantly on sugars. My focus is insane though. And when I need to focus, I can, which is the goal, right? And you start enjoying small things again. Your senses are heightened. I can show you the specific settings that you need to do this if you want to try it, but I'll warn you, you may not want to use your phone anymore. Calendar worship. So this idea of putting as much intentionality into your calendars as possible is super important. You want to make sure that if you want to drop into the flow state, you're setting time for it, but you're also putting yourself on airplane mode, so to speak. You want to let people know you're zoning in. Silence notifications, not mine, but other people's. Most people severely underutilize your calendars. You can cut cognitive loads by not having to figure out what you need to do next. A little prep and outlining goes a long way. I think Eddie's probably the best example of this because you look at his calendar, it's like it's completely blocked off. It's like his time is protected. It's on lockdown, right? You cannot schedule a call with him unless he approves it. So super important. I think that's something we can all improve in moving forward here. Begin mastering a craft. We talked about the challenge skill sweet spot, picking the area to grow in that arbitrarily is 4% outside of your skill range. When you do this consistently, you begin to master a specific craft and specialize in that craft. This makes you exponentially more valuable. It further increases your growth rate because that knowledge is compounded as you're growing. And then you can truly innovate upon an idea after you fully understood it. Bruce Lee, Kung Fu guy or karate guy, I'm not sure which one, but he said, beware not of the man that practices 10,000 different punches once, but the man that practices one punch 10,000 times. A lot of us are in this pure generalist section here where we have like a very, very large breadth of knowledge, right? We're a jack of all trades, master of none, but we lack the depth of knowledge, right? And so it's important to actually start developing that depth. The goal, obviously, ideally you're a T-shaped professional, like you have a big breadth, but also a very, very specialized knowledge. But this is something to start working towards. And when you actually do work towards this, you'll start realizing what your passions are. You're like, okay, like I cannot physically become an expert at this because I'm just not even curious about it one bit. And I'm not even able to tie it back into what I'm curious about or what I'm passionate about. So that's important to know. Mindfulness, remembering there is a flow cycle. You want to be conscious about these stages so that you can start getting good at realizing how you specifically respond to each one of these characteristics, right? When I'm in the struggle phase, I get itchy for some reason. That's not actually true, but like, for example, so knowing this, know how you specifically respond. Now you'll know how to overcome it, and you can actually it'll be further reassurance that you're actually about to enter the state, which is great. At the end of the day, your life will regress to the mean of your behavior. There's a mathematical or statistical concept called regression to the mean. Pretty much states if a random outcome of any occurrence or measurement is extreme in the first case, the second or later outcomes will be less extreme. We see this on the stock market all the time. There's a trend line, and we'll see that specific price action fluctuates around a specific trend, right? this pretty much means that your life will default to your average day. And you may have very highly productive days. You may have very extremely lazy days, but they will always regress back to the average. And that average you get to dictate. And you can raise the average by incorporating more flow into your life. So we asked earlier, why is our brain tagging these events as so meaningful? Why is this so important? Why are the happiest people and most satisfied people finding themselves in this state more often than others? Which means they're also progressing at a faster rate and partaking in all the other benefits. It's simply proof of true alignment with your purpose and the progression towards it. And it's only then when you define what that purpose is, what that passion is, that you get true intentionality, which leads to a life well lived. And we live super busy lives, and everyone here is busy. Sometimes we get to ask ourselves what we're really wanting out of life. But discovering what that is for you and taking meaningful steps towards it is actually a superpower within itself. And it's also the first step to entering the flow state. Thank you, guys. Does anyone have any questions?
Please type questions if you have questions, just so we can keep this civil. And
all right.
I'll let you take the chat, Christian.
All right. I'm just trying to, there's a lot going on here right now. Let's see. Let's see. Do they have raise hands features here? They do. Yeah, if we can just do that, I think that'd be better for me to actually see. Can flow cycle happen multiple times a day? Yes. So the optimal time period or normal time period for flow is anywhere between 90 to 120 minutes. You do need almost an equal amount of time for yourself to recover. So it can happen multiple times a day, especially if you've been practicing dopamine detoxing, you have more of those neurochemicals in your reserve, can definitely do that.
Nicola asks, have you ever managed to put yourself in flow state intentionally? And if yes, how often?
Yeah, no, I definitely do. I wouldn't say it's the most often. It's tough to like structure your life, but I'd say on weekends when I need to focus, I enter flow the most because I've actually blocked off time. I don't have meetings, right? I have to be very, very present to everyone on this call, this position. So it's like, there's some days where I can, but I'd say weekends are the best. I wouldn't say I'd say probably twice a day tops on the weekends. Like when I was building this presentation, I was in flow at least once or twice per weekend. Can you change your personality profile? Okay, yes. So if you think about it, nature versus nurture, right? That's the underlying question. We are born with a specific profile, and then what we're able to dictate is on a specific continuum. It's like a subcontinuum, right? So you may be born with like a very high agreeableness, right? Where you're like, your parents were very nice and you kind of had that growing up, but then you enter a relationship or a job or some scenario where it causes you to have to evolve, right? And you have to develop the new neural pathways to do that. You could definitely change it to some degree. It's just like you can't fully alternate your personality without some type of negative consequence, right? You'll be living in some type of misalignment. You can alter it for sure. It's just not like you can't switch to be something completely different. For example, the Myers-Briggs personality test, when I first took it, I was a INFP, so introvert, right? But I was like borderline introvert, which is the first letter. And then I took it like 10 years later and I had shifted over to the extrovert side, but barely as well. So there is that small area where you can actually shift your personality traits in some sense. What is the max overall time per day that you can be in flow state? That's kind of subjective, like 90 to 120 minutes, like I said, but it's really dictated by like how you have set your life up to be a catalyst for the flow state, which is the goal, right? Some of us are subject to more distractions than others based off of positions. So that's good to know. What are your thoughts on mushroom microdosing? I'd say there's some utility to it. Like I said with the brain imaging slide I showed you, there's definitely some overlap between the effects that you receive. I think flow is a much safer and more legal way to get focused if you need to, but it's, I'm not against it fully. The psychology community is like heavily researching it to treat different mental illnesses. So how does the first part of the flow cycle work? So struggle, the conscious thoughts of not wanting to do it. Next step, release, is going for a drive, etc. But isn't that just procrastinating? It isn't procrastinating. And I do see how you're making that connection. So when you are operating at a high sympathetic nervous system level and your heart's beating really quickly and you have this fight or flight response, you're also not working as optimally as possible because the stress response can hinder specific faculties of judgment, right? And how you're portraying or perceiving a specific situation. So again, I said, bring it to the point where you're like at that frustration mark, and then you want to back away as well. They did a study where they measured somebody's neurochemical level when they were angry versus somebody who was angry as well, but took action on that anger. So first guy's angry and then walks away pretty much from the situation and takes his mind off of it. Second guy angry and like lashes out, he punches the wall or something, and they measure those guys 2 to 3 hours later, and the guy who walked away, his levels were returned to normal, his heart rate was back to normal, his neurochemicals returned to normal, but the guy who actually acted out 2 to 3 hours later was still at that heightened stage. So it stays with you longer, and you stay in that anxious state for longer. Is flow enhanced by research and processing of your thoughts before applying? I would say it's like if you practice an introspection, if you know yourself, the more you know yourself, the more honest you can be, more aligned you'll be with whatever action you're taking. So I definitely think it can be enhanced. While practicing mindfulness, do you consider it would be beneficial to do in groups of 2 or 3? Would it be beneficial in order to enter the flow state? Okay, so there's so much I left out, guys. Like this was just the surface of what flow is. But there's individual flow and there's also group flow. So you can activate group flow where you're in like a group, ideally like 6 to 10, where you practice specific triggers together and get aligned on the specific outcome and purpose, and you can all enter it together. So I think Eric, you asked that. It would be beneficial in those cases, group flow state, to do it in groups. Best book to read is called The Art of Possible by Stephen Kotler. He is the owner of a research facility called Flow Research Collective, and they are part of a conglomerate of other companies that are looking into this area of psychology and consciousness. And yeah, they're discovering something new every day. So Art of Impossible, great book. Is mindfulness basically the same as being in flow? If not, what's the difference? Great question. Great question. Mindfulness is more the act of noticing granular details around you and how you're specifically reacting to them, right? So that you can know yourself. Flow is more of a physiological response to specific processes that you put in place or actions you've taken. Looks like that's it. But yeah, guys, I really appreciate you guys listening in. Definitely give me feedback. If you guys have any other questions, you want to learn more, you want any links to any of these tools that I mentioned, let me know. I can give you more, and I'd love to talk about this again with you. But other than that, have a great freaking Wednesday. Halfway there through the week. Let's crush it. Q2 just started.